Fog lay over Lorraine like a grey lid. Engines coughed to life. Through the haze, long barrels of Panther tanks probed forward. Hunters made half-blind by the weather. Somewhere beyond the folds of farmland waited Americans in Shermans, thinner armor. Smaller guns. On paper, the duel was decided before it began. But the battle around a small French village named Arracourt would prove that in war, how you fight often matters more than what you fight with. The board is set. By mid-September 1944, George Patton's Third Army had crossed France in a fury. But in Lorraine, momentum slowed, fuel ran short, the front line stretched thin over hedgerows, low ridges, and mist-soaked fields. The U.S. 4th Armored Division held a fluid perimeter around Arracourt, more outposts than trenches, more patrol lines than fortifications. Across the line, Army Group G under General Hermann Bauk tried to stop the American advance by throwing in newly formed panzer brigades, freshly issued Panthers and Panzer IVs with crews that ranged from veteran to barely trained. Orders were blunt: counterattack and breakthrough. Two truths defined the week ahead. The weather, days of thick fog that grounded Allied air power and turned gunnery into guesswork. The terrain, gentle French farmland scored with folds, orchard walls, drainage ditches, and low rises that hid movement and snared overconfident tanks. The American hand. The 4th Armored Division's Combat Command A, CCA, including Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams's 37th Tank Battalion and Lieutenant Colonel Charles Bazooka Charlie B. Clark's Armored Infantry and supporting units. Note: Bazooka Charlie is often associated with Charles Carpenter. The L4 pilot, here we'll stick with Colonel Bruce C. Clark, CCA's commander, had learned a hard lesson since Normandy. If you fight a Panther the Panther's way, head on at long range, you die. But if you fight inside 800 yards, using cover to slash at the flanks, you live. US advantages were not glamorous: radio discipline, combined arms, artillery on call, and a habit of pushing reconnaissance forward until scouts practically breathed the enemy's smoke. The Sherman's 75mm guns were modest, but rapid, accurate at short to medium range, and deadly against side armor. Most importantly, every platoon leader knew how to get a grid coordinate on the net and bring time on target fire crashing down before enemy commanders could sort out what had hit them. Day 1, a shape in the fog. The 18th of September 1944. Dawn slid over Arracourt like wet wool. German Panthers of Panzer Brigade 111 probed forward, following compass bearings more than maps. Their commanders expected to crush scattered American outposts. Instead, near Rechicourt-le-Petit and Lezy, they stumbled into a defense that wasn't a wall so much as a trap. Thin screens of Shermans and armored infantry refusing to trade shots at long range. American tankers did something simple and lethal. Let the Panthers come. Displace laterally behind hedgerows and sunken lanes. Open with smoke or a quick snap from a 75mm to make the Panther flinch. Flank to 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock and drill the side with armor-piercing rounds. Where a direct duel would have been suicide, squads turned the map into geometry, angles, distances, and timing. These beat the thicker armor. When Panthers massed, US forward observers, often crouched beside hedges with a wire handset, pulled in battalion and group artillery. In the fog, the first warning many German crews had that they were pre-registered targets was the whistle and rip of bursts walking their line. Panthers buttoned up, optics fogged, platoon leaders lost sight of each other, and the Shermans slid away to new angles. By noon, the Germans had lost tanks they never really saw, and CCA still held the ground. The counterattack. In the early afternoon, Panthers massed for a heavier push. Abrams, reading the ground like a chessboard, refused to fix his companies in place. He formed kill pockets behind low crests. As Panthers crested, their lower front plates flashed, and even a 75mm could bite. The Shermans darted forward in pairs, one to bait, one to sting. Every radio in the battalion hissed with short, disciplined call signs and grid squares. German crews were brave and their machines powerful, but they were blind outside their gun sights, fighting in weather that robbed them of their best asset, long-range gunnery. In the closing hours, US artillery pounded assembly areas while tank infantry teams clipped off strays. Night fell with burning silhouettes throbbing in the fog. Day 2, Panzer Brigade 112 enters. The 19th of September saw Panzer Brigade 112 commit. The pattern repeated, but faster. The Panthers pushed into the mist toward Buers, Chateau Salins, and the knuckles of high ground near Arracourt. Again they met not a trench line but a maze, Shermans that never stayed where they were spotted. Half-tracks bringing riflemen to sever tendons, tank tracks, fuel trucks, radio jeeps, the fragile parts of a steel beast. In one sector, a Panther platoon came on in a neat line and took fire from nowhere. The Americans were not invisible, they were simply elsewhere every few minutes. Sliding behind new folds and firing from 400 to 600 yards at the moment Panthers exposed their flanks to answer the last threat. When a German company finally found a clean angle, it swallowed smoke and artillery. The clean angle vanished. That night, reports stacked up at German headquarters, radio confusion. Units broken. Panthers missing not because the crews were cowards but because they had driven into a moving lattice of fire. The knife fight expands. Through the 20th to the 22nd of September, the skirmish ballooned into a rolling battle. The US trench was a verb, not a noun. Recon screens pulsed forward, then fell back. Tank platoons sliced at the edges, then refused pursuit. When fog thinned, fighter bombers took bites from convoys. When it thickened, the artillery did the biting. American battalion staff kept a living mental map, not just where the enemy was, but where he was going to be in 10 minutes if he kept following the land. German brigade commanders tried to coordinate, but the fog and flexible American defense shattered every tidy arrow on their situation maps. Panthers that hunted bold found themselves isolated. Panthers that hunted cautious arrived too late to help. The Americans were not invulnerable. Shermans burned. Outposts were overrun, but the cost exchange tilted relentlessly against the attackers. Why the Panthers lost more than tanks? The Panthers did not just lose machines. They lost time, initiative, and cohesion. Their advantages, front armor and a superb 75mm high-velocity gun, depend on seeing first and shooting far. Fog erased that. The Americans learned to pick terrain that shortened sightlines and then adapted tactics to exploit it. No frontal duels. If a Panther faced you frontally at 1.500 yards, you were already wrong. Stacked fires. A tank platoon's job was not to kill every enemy. It was to hold the enemy at the right angle while someone else killed him, another platoon. A 105mm battery. A bazooka team behind a wall. Radios as weapons. The fastest shooters were not the gunners, they were the net control stations. A clear grid call could be worth 10 Shermans. German brigades, new to their radios and unfamiliar with each other, fought like clenched fists that could not coordinate with the next fist. By the time orders filtered forward, the target had moved. The climax, a village and a ridgeline. By the 24th to the 25th of September, German pressure peaked near the ridges south and east of Arracourt. Panthers nosed into villages, their engines drumming against stone walls while infantry detoured through gardens. American tankers waited at reverse slopes, let the Panthers top out, and put their first rounds into belly plates or turret rings. When Panthers tried to use their own artillery, counter battery and air when available forced them to move. American armored infantry, scrappy, underpraised, kept Faust teams off the Shermans by drilling alleys and orchards with Browning fire. Then pivoted to hold corners while tanks relocated. It was messy, loud, and intimate, but each hour the Germans bled momentum they could not spare. The weather breaks, the verdict congeals. As the fog finally thinned, American air power re-entered with cruelty and precision, P-47s snarling down on columns that had pushed too far without air cover. What the weather had started, the fighter bombers finished. German brigades were now armored facts without a plan. Fuel ran short. Recovery teams dodged artillery to drag hulks out of fields. The Panthers' long barrels, so fearsome in manuals, looked like spears stuck in a dragon none of whose legs obeyed. By the 29th of September, the counteroffensive had burned out. The US 4th Armored Division held Arracourt. German losses, especially in Panthers, were heavy. American losses, real but far lower, could be replaced. The attackers had not only failed to break the line, they had taught the defenders how to break future attacks faster. The ledger, what the numbers mean. Accounts vary, but the constants are clear. Over roughly 11 days, German panzer brigades lost dozens of Panthers and Panzer IVs in the Arracourt area, while the 4th Armored's losses were only a fraction of that number. Even more important than totals is exchange ratio under conditions that supposedly favored the attacker. When air support was limited, terrain and tactics carried the day. When air returned, it was decisive because the ground fight had already set the table. Lessons written in exhaust fumes. Same firepower, different outcome. You can't fix a bad plan with thicker armor. Terrain is technology. A hedgerow is an upgrade if you know how to use it. Radios win duels you never see. The net is a weapon. Command and control kill invisibly. Flex beats mass. A smaller force that moves and calls faster defeats a larger force that thinks slower. Fog cuts both ways. If you train to shoot far, the weather gives your enemy a chance to fight close. Epilogue, the village that became a lesson. Arracourt is not a famous capital or fortress, it is hedges, orchards, and road signs pointing to villages you have never heard of. But it is a place where doctrine met reality and reality punched back. The Panthers did not meet stronger machines, they met smarter fights. In the end, the fog lifted and the lesson remained: in armored war, the sharpest blade is not steel, it is judgment. Voices on the net. At Arracourt, the most lethal American weapon didn't kick, recoil, or leave a muzzle flash, it spoke. The radio net stitched platoons, scouts, artillery observers, and headquarters into a single, nervous system. Short transmissions, never speeches, carried the fight. White 2, smoke out, shift left 20 yards, hold, mark. Red able to firefly, enemy cresting east hedgerow, 3 Panthers, column, grid 138.6, time on target. 30 seconds. Fox recon to all call signs, engine noise southwest. Irregular, sounds like single company. Wheels and tracks, estimate 30 vehicles, over. When you are inside a tank, the radio is both compass and rope. It points where to go and keeps you from falling alone into the dark. It also compresses decision time. At Arracourt, a platoon sergeant could pivot his section within seconds because he heard the geometry change. A tanker's window. Inside a Sherman, the world is a small rectangle of light. Corporal Jim H., gunner, kept his eye to the M70 sight. He rarely saw a whole Panther. He saw a slice, a bit of side armor, a corner of a turret ring, a flash of lower glacis when a hull lifted over a rise. His crew routine was a metronome. Loader, up. Commander, on, 3, 2, fire. Gunner, crack, clang, smoke. Driver, back 2 lengths. Bow gunner, spraying hedgerow as if firing at the fog itself. Because the fog sometimes fired back. They didn't wait for confirmation kills. They moved. If the target burned, good. If it didn't, someone else in the lattice would see the next angle. Survival was rhythm, not spectacle. The math behind the thunder. Time on target, sounds poetic, it is mathematics under stress. Each battery calculates shell flight times so rounds launched from different guns arrive together. For a few heartbeats, the enemy receives maximum shock before he can take cover. At Arracourt, fog punished eyes and rewarded clocks. US fire direction centers became orchestras of seconds. Wind, charge, elevation, distance, correction. When Panthers paused to align or reform, treated their pause like a confession. The map that kept moving. In the battalion tent, the staff map never matched the ground for long. Grease pencil arrows were suggestions quickly contradicted by reality. The S3 learned to think in boxes instead of lines. If they enter this box, we hit them from these 2 corners. If they avoid it, we shift the box. Combat at Arracourt was a conversation between intention and terrain. The Americans kept changing the terrain's meaning. A hedgerow that was cover at 8 o'clock became a funnel at 8:15 when 2 platoons turned it into converging arcs of fire. From the other side, a German officer's note. A fictional composite, drawn from typical reports of the period. We moved by compass as fog erased all landmarks. Our Panthers are confident when we see at range. But today we saw only silhouettes. We tried to fix the enemy frontally. They slipped to the side like water. Artillery found us quickly, too quickly. Radios were not enough. Our sections could not keep mutual sight. We are strong as individuals, as a group we were blind. The Panthers were formidable machines. But machines crave conditions. Arracourt denied them the condition they needed most: clarity. The myths arrive late. After battles, myths clatter down the road like ammo boxes in a half-track. Myth: Shermans were outclassed everywhere. Arracourt: Shermans were outclassed where they fought the wrong fight. At Arracourt, they fought the right one. Myth: Fog was luck. Arracourt: Fog was work, recon discipline, flanking drills, pre-registered artillery, and leaders who refused to be fixed in place. Luck matters in war. Preparation bends luck until it begins to look like doctrine. The infantry's invisible hands. Arracourt's tank story is also an infantry story. Armored riflemen guarded flanks that didn't exist on the map, a garden wall. A stone shed, a shallow ditch you'd ignore if you were not the one about to die behind it. They shot shape into the fog, Browning bursts to dissuade Faust teams. Hand signals to invite a Sherman forward or warn it off. When a Panther nosed into a village, it found the village fighting back, not in one grand blow, but in 100 petty refusals to yield corners. Abrams's chalkboard. Creighton Abrams preferred sensible aggression. He taught in verbs: displace, bait, sting, refuse, press. To a young platoon leader he said, "Don't be impressed with their front armor. Be impressed with your choices." The blackboard lesson for Arracourt read like this: choose the fight, short sightlines, flank angles. Choose the timing, Make the enemy commit before you reveal. Choose the tools, guns where guns work, artillery where artillery works, infantry everywhere. The cost no map shows. Victory tickets are stamped in smoke and oil, but they're paid for in letters. The 4th Armored wrote home about burned paint, ringing ears, friends who didn't climb out. German families received notices that used neutral words for violent ends. Arracourt's fields grew quiet again, but the soil remembered. Broken track links sank out of sight. A wrench, left on a fender the last time a crew laughed, fell into tall grass and waited for a farmer's plow years later. Why Arracourt still teaches. Modern commanders study Arracourt to learn how to steal the equation from a superior gun platform. Make ranges short. Make angles many. Make decisions faster than the enemy can observe them. When the weather clears, invite air power to finish a problem already solved on the ground. A final vignette, the hedge at 138.6. At a hedgerow marked on one map as nothing and on another as everything. 2 Shermans waited. The first reversed slowly, its engine note a decoy. The second crouched, a strange verb for a machine, behind a rise. A panther crested, nose proud, sure of its lineage. The waiting gun spoke once. Twice. The panther stopped being a plan and became an object. Smoke curled over apples in the orchard. The loader breathed out. The commander said nothing. The driver counted to 3, shifted, and both tanks were elsewhere. Coda, judgment. Arracourt's simplest truth is also its sternest. Judgment beats hardware when hardware is forced to guess. The fog lifted. The lesson stayed. The mechanic's midnight. Victory at dawn is welded at midnight. Under blackout tarps behind an orchard. Company mechanics worked by touch and memory. A thrown track hissed in wet grass. A road wheel squealed as it came free. Corporal Diaz, hands black with oil, listened to AV-8 idle and said, "She'll hold." They were cartographers of failure, where seals wept, where bolts loosened, what dust choked which carburetor. Their ledger was practical theology, if this then that. Or you walk tomorrow, a patched fuel line, a cannibalized periscope, a coax that finally fed. Each small fix extended the geometry of options for the morning's fight. The battery's grammar. In a thicket 4.000 yards rearward, a 105mm battery breathed in slow sentences. The fire direction center spoke grammar none of them could see but all of them trusted. Subject, Panther platoon, hedgerow east. Verb, suppress. Object, assembly area at 138.6. Adverb, now. The guns answered with punctuation, commas of ranging shots. Then the long exclamation of a salvo. A young lieutenant folded his slide rule, marked wind, and learned that war is an essay you hand in with trembling fingers while the graders shoot back. The farmer's fence. On the edge of a field, a French farmer watched from behind a fence he had built with his father. The fence had kept cows in and thieves out, now it kept nothing. Tanks ignored it like a rumor. After the battle, he would rebuild it stone by stone, discovering shrapnel smooth as river pebbles. He would keep one piece on his mantle and never say why. The P-47's angle. When the sky finally opened, a thunderbolt came down like a choice. Lieutenant Mercer rolled into a shallow dive, eyes parsing the ground for motion, geometry, intent. He did not hunt tanks, he hunted mistakes, columns too tight. Trucks parked by hedges, a flash of muzzle where muzzle should not be. His rockets were arguments, his strafing was an editorial. He pulled up through tracer and told himself the same joke he always told, once more for luck. But luck, he knew, was just rehearsal with timing. The lost panther. A single panther, cut from its pride, idled in a sunken lane, engine coughing like a man who doesn't want to wake the house. The commander raised his head to the cupola and saw only damp light. He thought of his crew's letters, of the biscuit in his pocket, of how the map never matched the earth. When the first Sherman round kissed the turret ring, he understood, not defeat, not fate, but misplacement. He had arrived a few minutes too late to the wrong idea. He ordered smoke, the driver stalled, the world became instruction he could not read. The after-action. In a schoolhouse commandeered for staff work, the after-action review began with coffee and silence. A chalkboard waited. What worked? Worked. Lateral displacement in pairs, pre-registered hedgerows, faux nets on separate frequency, infantry owning alleys. Failed. Over-pursuit beyond line of sight, a platoon that loved a hill too much, a jeep that tried to be a tank. Bottom line, asked the S3. We moved decisions forward, said Abrams, and we kept them moving. The letters home. 2 letters crossed a continent and an ocean, one from a gunner in the 37th, I am safe. It was foggy and loud. Please send socks. Tell Dad the new carb works better if you feather it. One from a German mother to a son she would never reach. The pairs are early this year. Your father says the roof finally holds. We will keep a light for you. Both envelopes were honest. Only one would be opened by the person named on it. Doctrine, reduced and enlarged. Arracourt's curriculum is a paradox. Reduce doctrine to verbs, enlarge judgment to fit the day. Reduce, fix, flank, finish. Enlarge, which hedgerow, which minute, which net. If you must choose between a clever plan and adaptable people, choose the people. They will invent the plan that survives first contact with weather. Steel and breath. A tank is steel, a crew is breath, victory is steel guided by breath, metal obedient to thinking that is neither hurried nor slow, but timed. The Shermans at Arracourt did not grow new armor. Their crews learned to spend fear like currency. Purchase 10 yards of angle. Buy 2 seconds of flank. Invest a round where it buys the next decision. The librarian of shells. Sergeant Baines, the ammo NCO, was a librarian of shells. He here, at there, smoke stacked like unwritten paragraphs. He could look at the day's receipts, empty crates, dented bands, and tell the story backward. Lot 124, Leslie, that was smoke in the lane. Lot 209, Bewers, that was the orchard. War, like any library, is organized hope, what you think you'll need when you have no idea what the next reader will ask. The mapmaker's blink. A cartographer arrived 2 days late with clean boots and clean paper. He traced roads that now leaned a little differently because memory had redrawn them. A farmer insisted a ditch was deeper than it looked. A private insisted a hill was higher than it measured. The mapmaker nodded and blinked twice, adding a subtle hatch to the slope. He had learned his craft's hardest truth. Terrain is objective. Combat is subjective. And history is where the two negotiate. The field after. When the battle moved on, the field remained, a theater without actors. Birds returned first, then boys with pockets for shrapnel, then men with rumors. The hedgerow at 138.6 grew back, the leaves scorched off it. A year later the farmer ploughed a neat furrow, struck iron, cursed softly, and set a track link on the wall of his shed. He never painted it. Rust, he thought, is honest paint. The question we keep. What decides a battle, metal, math, or men? Arracourt answers by refusing to choose. Metal provided options, math aligned time, men selected, and reselected, until the enemy's best assets waited for conditions that never arrived. If you need a headline, same firepower, different choices. Last light. At last light on the final day, a Sherman parked behind a hayrick and idled. The commander removed his headset and heard, for the first time, wind. It made an ordinary sound across extraordinary ground. Button up, he said finally, not because a threat remained, but because habits do. They rolled out, tracks ticking like a clock that had decided to keep tomorrow. Medics between shells. The lull between barrages belonged to the medics. They learned the map by blood type. Private O'Neill carried morphine syrets in a sock and a habit of talking while he worked. You're okay. Stick with me, eyes on my sleeve. They triaged by sound, who was quiet, who was getting louder, who had stopped being either. A litter team crossed a lane where 2 hours earlier Panthers had traded shots with Shermans. Now the arguments were over, only consequences remained. Prisoners and questions. On the second afternoon, a group of German prisoners came in under white cloth and raised hands. Mud up to their knees. One sergeant spoke excellent English learned in a Hamburg warehouse. He asked for water. He asked where they'd gone wrong. The MP said gently, "You came when we wanted you to." The sergeant nodded as if he had expected that answer all day. Defeat, he realized, is not always a collapse. Sometimes it is simply arriving on schedule, someone else's. Weather as a commander. Forecasts were guesses in uniform. A weather team, working off balloon readings and front maps, had warned of persistent fog. The S2 stapled that note to the tactical plan. Short sightlines. No long duels. Artillery ready to bite assembly areas. When the fog thickened beyond their estimate, no one blamed the weatherman. They promoted the fog, made it a commander. With intent and capability, and tailored orders to defeat it or borrow it. The quartermaster's line. At the railhead, the quartermaster turned logistics into patience. Gas cans came like votes, one by one. Then suddenly enough to win. A clerk penciled, priority, Abrams, on crates because she'd heard the name 3 times that morning and decided it mattered. By evening, spare tracks clanked down a ramp. Crates of 75mm he thumped onto a flatbed. And a driver asked the oldest question in war. How far is enough? A Panzer crew's notebook. In a pocket taken from a knocked-out Panther lay a notebook in neat block letters. Grid squares, fuel tallies, a single line, fog thick, optics useless, Americans fight like ghosts with telephones. It is a good description. The Americans were not invisible, they were connected to each other. To guns beyond sight, to clocks that agreed. The line between bold and reckless. Abrams liked aggression that paid rent, every risk bringing back ground. Prisoners, or information. He stopped a pursuit when a platoon commander began to love his own chase more than the objective. Bold is when you know why. Reckless is when you don't, he said, and ordered the platoon to displace behind the next fold and wait for artillery to write the next sentence. Maintenance as mercy. In a hedgerow bay, a crew pulled a glowing brake drum and let it hiss in a bucket. They passed around canteens like communion and laughed at nothing. The driver filed a burr from a track tooth, saving a derail that would have come at the worst possible moment. This is the quiet math of survival. A file stroke now prevents a letter later that begins. We regret to inform you. The church and the map. The village church kept a map of baptisms, marriages, funerals. The battalion spread its overlays beside it, phase lines, TRPs, NAIs. 2 registers of life intersected for 3 days and then parted again. The priest blessed both maps. He had no doctrine for tanks but a deep one for people. Choose well, he said to a lieutenant who didn't believe in blessings but nodded anyway. What the gunners remember. Ask a gunner what he remembers and he tells you numbers and angles. 600 yards broadside, 1 mil low, wind from the right. He might mention a tree that looked like a man and a man who looked like a tree. He might not mention fear at all, not because it wasn't there, but because fear was spent and therefore gone, change returned in the currency of seconds and yards. The debrief that stuck. At the final debrief, the chalkboard filled quickly. Keep recon honest, if you can't see. Listen, if you can't listen. Feel, mud on tracks. Air pressure drops, the way birds shut up. Artillery before heroics, kill with systems first. Courage second. Angles are a resource, budget them like fuel. Someone added, luck. Abrams erased it and wrote, preparation. The museum years later. Years after the war, a Sherman sat in a museum hall with a sign that summarized 3 weeks into 3 paragraphs. Children tapped the armor. A veteran stood at an angle to the hull as if waiting for a shot that would never come. He told a docent, it wasn't the tank, it was time. The docent wrote it down and later put it on a plaque where visitors could mistake it for poetry. It was not poetry, it was procedure remembered as truth.